The Montana winter of 1873 came with a vengeance that even old-timers hadn't seen in years. Snow fell in thick curtains across the prairie, burying fence posts and turning the landscape into an endless white desert. The wind howled like a wounded animal, carrying ice crystals that cut through even the thickest wool coats. Sarah Whitman pulled her threadbare shawl tighter around her shoulders as she stood outside the boarding house that had been her refuge for the past 3 months. Mrs. Harrington, the proprietress, stood in the doorway with her arms crossed, her face as cold as the December air. "I've given you enough time, Mrs. Whitman," the older woman said, her voice sharp with finality. "The other boarders are talking. A widow like you, with the rumors going around. It's bad for business." Sarah's fingers, already numb from the cold, tightened on the small carpet bag that held everything she owned in the world. "Please, Mrs. Harrington, just until the weather breaks. I have nowhere—" "That's not my concern." The door slammed shut with a finality that echoed across the empty street. Sarah stood there for a moment, stunned despite knowing this day would come. Cedar Ridge had never been kind to her, not since James died 6 months ago. The whispers had started at his funeral, cruel speculation about why a man would fall from his horse on a clear day, why his young wife was the only witness. By the time the gossips were done spinning their tales, Sarah had transformed from grieving widow to suspected murderess in the court of public opinion. She turned and began walking, her worn boots crunching through the fresh snow. The few people on the street averted their eyes as she passed. Even the shopkeeper who'd once smiled at her now turned his back when he saw her coming. The edge of town came too quickly. Beyond lay miles of open prairie, the road to the next settlement barely visible beneath the drifting snow. Sarah had $7 to her name, a loaf of day-old bread, and clothes suited for autumn, not a Montana blizzard. She kept walking because there was nothing else to do. The wind picked up, driving snow horizontally across her path. Within an hour, ice had formed on her eyelashes and her fingers had lost all feeling. Her feet became clumsy blocks that caught on hidden obstacles beneath the snow. Memories came unbidden as her body began to fail. James laughing as he spun her around their tiny kitchen. The dream of children that would never be. The small farm they'd planned to buy come spring. All of it buried now, as surely as she would soon be buried beneath this pitiless snow. Sarah stumbled and fell, the impact jarring her teeth. She tried to rise, but her legs wouldn't cooperate. The cold didn't hurt anymore. A dangerous sign. She knew. Her mother had told her stories of travelers who simply lay down in the snow and never got up again, smiling as they froze. Through the swirling white, she glimpsed a dark shape, a building of some kind. Sarah crawled forward, using the last reserves of strength she didn't know she possessed. Her hands were useless clubs now, barely able to grasp anything. It was a barn large and well built, with gaps between the boards that promised at least some shelter from the wind. Sarah found a loose board and managed to pry it aside enough to squeeze through. The interior was dim but blessedly free of wind. The smell of horses and hay filled her nostrils. She collapsed in a corner where hay had been piled high, burrowing into it like an animal seeking warmth. Her body shook violently, teeth chattering so hard she feared they might break. This was where she would die. Then, not in a warm bed surrounded by family, but alone in a stranger's barn, branded a pariah by the only town she'd known since coming west. Sarah closed her eyes and tried to pray, but the words wouldn't come. What God would listen to a woman everyone believed capable of murder instead? She whispered James's name and waited for the end. Thomas Morrison had seen plenty of storms in his 40 years, but this one had teeth. He'd spent the day moving his cattle to shelter, working alongside his ranch hands until they were all half frozen and exhausted. Now, near midnight, he made one last check on his horses before turning in. The barn was dark, save for the lantern in his hand. The horses nickered softly as he passed. Recognizing his presence, Everything seemed in order until he reached the far corner where they stored extra hay. Something was different. The hay had been disturbed, and there was that fabric. Thomas raised his lantern higher and his breath caught. A woman lay curled in the hay. So still and pale she might have been carved from ice. "Jesus Christ!" he muttered, setting down the lantern and dropping to his knees beside her. His fingers found her throat, searching for a pulse. There, faint but present, she was alive. Barely. Thomas had seen men freeze to death. Once the cold got deep enough into a body, warming them too quickly could kill them just as surely as the cold itself. But leaving her here meant certain death. He gathered her into his arms, shocked at how light she was. Her clothes were soaked through and frozen stiff. Ice had formed in her dark hair, and her lips were blue. How long had she been here? The house was only 50 yards away, but it might as well have been 50 miles in this storm. Thomas wrapped her in his own coat and plunged back into the blizzard. The wind tried to tear her from his arms, but he held tight, following the rope he'd strung between barn and house for nights like this. Inside, he laid her on the rug before the fireplace and began the delicate work of saving her life. Her frozen clothes had to come off, modesty be damned, when death was the alternative. He worked quickly, professionally, as he would with a half-frozen calf, wrapping her in blankets warmed by the fire. But it wasn't enough. Her breathing was too shallow, her skin corpse white. Thomas knew what he had to do, though it would ruin them both if anyone found out. He stripped down to his union suit and slid under the blankets with her, pulling her against his chest. "Don't you die on me," he said through gritted teeth as her icy skin burned against his warmth. "You hear me? You fought to get to that barn. Don't you dare give up now." Hours passed. Thomas held her, sharing his heat, talking to her though she showed no sign of hearing. He told her about the ranch, about his horses, about anything that came to mind. Slowly, so slowly he almost missed it. Color began returning to her cheeks. Her breathing deepened. Near dawn, she stirred. Her eyes fluttered open, brown as coffee. Confused and frightened, she tried to pull away but was too weak. "Easy," Thomas said, his voice gentle. "You're safe. You nearly froze by the barn. I swore to save you, and my bed was waiting. Just rest now. We'll sort out the details when you're stronger." Sarah's eyes searched his face, looking for threat or deception, finding neither. She let exhaustion claim her again, but just before she slipped back into sleep, Thomas thought he saw the glimmer of tears on her cheeks. He held her until the sun broke through the storm clouds, until he was certain she would live. Only then did he carefully extract himself, dress, and set about making the strongest coffee he could brew. They would both need it for the conversation that must come. Outside, the blizzard had finally exhausted itself. The world lay buried under pristine white, as if God had decided to give Montana a clean slate. Thomas looked at the sleeping woman, young, pretty despite her ordeal, wearing no wedding ring, and wondered what desperate circumstances had driven her into the storm. Whatever her story, she was his responsibility now. He'd saved her life, and in the unwritten code of the frontier, that created a bond not easily broken. The question was, what would he do when she was well enough to leave, and more troubling, why did the thought of her leaving already fill him with an unexpected dread? Sarah woke to sunlight streaming through unfamiliar windows and the smell of coffee brewing. For a moment, she couldn't place where she was. Then memory crashed over her. The storm, the barn, and she sat up quickly, clutching the quilt to her chest, her heart racing. She was in a man's shirt, far too large for her frame. Her own clothes were nowhere to be seen. The room was simple but clean, rough wooden walls, a dresser with a cracked mirror, and a rocking chair by the window. A man's room. The door opened and Sarah shrank back. The man who entered was tall and broad-shouldered, with weathered features and kind gray eyes. He carried a tray with coffee and what looked like breakfast. "You're awake. Good." He set the tray on the bedside table and stepped back, giving her space. Name's Thomas Morrison. This is my ranch. Sarah found her voice, though it came out as barely a whisper. My clothes. Drying by the kitchen stove. They were frozen solid, would have killed you if I'd left them on. His voice was matter of fact, but he kept his eyes on her face, not letting them wander. I'll fetch them once they're ready. Are you hungry? The smell of bacon made her stomach clench with need, but shame burned hotter. I should go. In what your clothes won't be dry for hours yet, and the storms left drift 6 feet high in places. You're not going anywhere today. He moved to the door. Eat something. Build your strength. We'll talk when you're ready. He left before she could protest. Sarah stared at the tray bacon, biscuits, preserves, and strong black coffee. When had she last eaten a proper meal, she fell upon the food with unseemly haste. Later, wearing her dried but shabby dress, Sarah found Thomas in the kitchen. He was mending a bridle, his large hands surprisingly gentle with the leather. He looked up as she entered. Feeling better? Yes, thank you. She stood awkwardly in the doorway. Mr. Morrison, what you did, I'm grateful, but people might talk if they knew. People always talk. He set aside the bridle. Sit. You look ready to fall over. Sarah sank into a chair. The kitchen was warm and homey. With copper pots hanging from hooks and curtains, she suspected a woman had chosen. I should explain. You don't owe me explanations, but if you want to tell it, I'll listen. The kindness in his voice nearly undid her. Sarah found herself speaking, the words tumbling out like water through a broken dam. She told him about James, about the accident, about the whispers that grew into accusations, about being turned out with nowhere to go. Thomas listened without interrupting, his face giving nothing away. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Cedar Ridge. He shook his head. Small towns can be cruel to women alone. Lost my wife Margaret 3 years back. I know how grief feels, and I know how folks can twist things. Your wife, I'm sorry. Fever took her. Nothing anyone could do. He stood and refilled her coffee cup. Here's what I propose. This storm's not done yet, weather like this. Could be another blow coming. You stay here until it passes. Help with cooking and mending if you feel you need to earn your keep. When the road's clear, we'll figure out what comes next. I couldn't. You could and you will, unless you'd prefer freezing to death to prove a point about propriety. His tone was firm, but not unkind. I've got a ranch to run. You've got nowhere to go. Seems foolish for both of us to suffer for the sake of wagging tongues that already think the worst anyway. Sarah knew she should refuse. A widow staying with an unmarried man, even with the best intentions, was scandalous. But what choice did she have? Pride was a luxury she couldn't afford. All right, until the weather clears. Thomas nodded. Good. Now, can you cook, because I've been living on beans and burned beef for 6 months? Despite everything, Sarah felt her lips twitch toward a smile, the first in longer than she could remember. I can cook. The days that followed fell into a rhythm. Sarah rose early to make breakfast while Thomas saw to the animals. They ate together, speaking of practical things, the weather, the ranch, the work that needed doing. Thomas was gone much of the day, checking cattle and repairing damage from the storm. Sarah kept house, finding satisfaction in bringing order to a bachelor's dwelling. In the evenings, they sat by the fire. Sometimes Thomas would tell stories of his early days in Montana, when the territory was wilder and the nearest neighbor 50 miles off. Sarah found herself sharing memories too, her childhood in Ohio, how she'd met James, their dreams of building something in the West. She learned that Thomas had come from Tennessee after the war, seeking a fresh start like so many others. He'd built this ranch from nothing, fighting weather and isolation to create something lasting. His hands bore the scars of that work, and his eyes held shadows that suggested other scars less visible. "Why didn't you remarry?" Sarah asked one evening, surprising herself with the boldness of the question. Thomas was quiet so long she thought he wouldn't answer. "Never found anyone who—" He stopped, started again. "Margaret and I had 20 good years. Didn't seem right, trying to replace that." "I understand." And she did. Even with James gone and her reputation in ruins, the thought of another marriage had never crossed her mind. What they'd had was brief but real. "Do you miss her terribly?" "Every day, but it's different now. Softer, maybe like remembering warmth instead of feeling the fire." They fell into companionable silence. Sarah noticed how careful Thomas was to maintain distance between them, how he announced himself before entering a room, how he retired early to give her privacy. His consideration touched her more than grand gestures might have. The storm Thomas predicted arrived 3 days later, worse than the first. The wind screamed around the house and snow piled against the windows. Thomas barely made it back from the barn, ice coating his beard and eyebrows. "Lost 2 calves," he said grimly, standing by the stove. "Damn cold's like nothing I've seen." Sarah helped him out of his frozen coat. "You're half frozen yourself. Sit down before you fall down." She bustled about, making hot coffee and soup, forcing him to eat. It felt natural, caring for him this way. Dangerous, how natural it felt. That night, with the storm raging, they sat closer to the fire than usual. Thomas had brought out a chess set, teaching her the game with patience. "You're a quick study," he said as she captured his bishop. "I had a good teacher. She moved her queen. Check." He laughed, a rusty sound like he didn't use it often. "Maybe too good." He studied the board. "You know, Margaret never had the patience for chess. Said I thought too long about every move." "You do think too long," Sarah said, then blushed at her familiarity. But Thomas smiled. "Fair enough." He moved his king. "Your move, Mrs. Whitman." "Sarah," she said quietly. "Just Sarah." Their eyes met across the chessboard. Something shifted in the air between them, fragile as spun glass. Thomas cleared his throat and looked away. "Sarah." Then, later, as Sarah prepared for bed in the room that had become hers, she caught sight of herself in the cracked mirror. Her cheeks had color again. When had that happened? When had the hollow look left her eyes? She thought of Thomas, patient and kind, asking nothing of her but what she freely gave, of his careful respect and unexpected humor, of how safe she felt here, storm or no storm. It was temporary, she reminded herself. When the weather broke, she would have to leave, go somewhere, anywhere, and try to build a life from nothing. The thought filled her with a weariness that went bone deep. But for now, for these stolen days while winter raged outside, she would let herself rest. Let herself remember what it felt like to be treated as a person of worth. It would make leaving harder, but she couldn't bring herself to care. In the morning, there would be breakfast to make and clothes to mend, simple things, but they anchored her to the present, keeping the dark thoughts at bay. For now, that was enough. The storms finally broke in the 3rd week, leaving behind a world transformed by snow and brilliant sunshine. Sarah stood at the kitchen window, watching the ice crystals sparkle like scattered diamonds. The roads would be passable soon. The thought sat heavy in her chest. "Spring's coming early," Thomas said behind her. She hadn't heard him enter. "See how the snow's starting to settle? Another week, maybe 2, and the road to town will be clear." Sarah nodded, not trusting her voice. They stood together in silence, watching the morning light paint the mountains pink and gold. "I've been thinking," Thomas said slowly. "Ranch this size, it's too much for one person. Been falling behind since Margaret." He cleared his throat. "Could use help with the books, the house, proper wages, of course. Room and board included." Sarah's hands tightened on the windowsill. "Thomas, you don't have to." "I'm not offering charity." His voice was firm. You've proven yourself these weeks. House hasn't been this well kept in years, and you've got a head for figures. Help me catch that error in the feed orders yesterday." It was true. Sarah had discovered she had a talent for organization, bringing order to Thomas's haphazard record-keeping. But they both knew this offer was about more than ledgers and housework. "People will talk," she said softly. "Let them. I need help. You need work. Simple as that." Nothing about it was simple, and they both knew it. But Sarah heard herself saying yes anyway. The new arrangement settled into routine. Sarah took over the household accounts and correspondence while Thomas focused on the ranch work. They were careful to maintain propriety. Sarah kept to the house during the day while the ranch hands were about, and Thomas made sure to mention her employed status to anyone who asked. Still, there were moments, their fingers brushing as she handed him coffee, the way his eyes found hers across the supper table. How naturally they moved around each other in the kitchen, like dancers who'd practiced the steps for years. One afternoon, Sarah was hanging laundry when she heard horses approaching fast. 3 riders, strangers by their look, reining up hard by the house. Something in their bearing made her uneasy. Well, the lead rider said, eyeing her. "Heard Morrison had taken on help. Didn't hear she was so pretty." Sarah kept her voice steady. "Mr. Morrison is in the north pasture. You're welcome to wait by the barn." "Rather wait here." He swung down from his horse, the other 2 following. "Maybe you could offer some hospitality. Coffee, perhaps, or something warmer." The suggestion in his voice made her skin crawl. Sarah took a step back toward the house. "I'll tell Mr. Morrison you're here." The man moved to block her path. "No rush. We're in no hurry." Sarah's heart pounded, but she lifted her chin. "Step aside, please." "Feisty," his companions laughed. "I like that in a woman." Sarah remembered the rifle Thomas kept by the door. She'd watched him clean it, noted where he stored the ammunition. Moving quickly, she darted around the man and into the house. Her hands shook as she loaded the weapon, but her voice was steady when she stepped back onto the porch. "You'll leave now." She kept the rifle trained on the leader's chest. "Mount up and ride out." The man's face darkened. "You won't shoot. Women don't." Sarah fired into the ground at his feet. The horses shied and whinnied. "Next one won't miss. Get on your horse." For a moment, violence hung in the air. Then Thomas's voice cut through like a blade. "I'd do as the lady says." He sat his horse at the corner of the house, his own rifle casual in his hands. "Bentley, should have known. You're not welcome here." "Just being neighborly. Morrison wanted to meet your new employee." The word dripped with insinuation. "You've met her. Now get off my land before I forget my manners." Bentley's eyes flicked between Sarah and Thomas. "This isn't over." "It is if you're smart." Thomas's voice was winter cold. "Don't come back." They watched the riders disappear over the rise. Only then did Sarah lower the rifle, her hands trembling now that danger had passed. Thomas dismounted and took the weapon gently. "You all right?" "Yes." Her voice sounded strange to her own ears. "I didn't know if I could actually—" "You did fine. Better than fine." His hand cupped her elbow, steadying her. "Where'd you learn to shoot?" I watched you." Something flickered in his eyes. "Sarah, I couldn't let them—" She stopped, suddenly aware of how close they stood. Thomas stepped back, his jaw tight. "I'll have Jake keep an eye on the house when I'm out. Bentley's got a mean streak." That night, Sarah found him sitting on the porch despite the cold, staring out at the darkness. "Can't sleep either." She pulled her shawl tighter and sat in the other chair. "Keep thinking what might have happened if I'd been farther out." His voice was rough. "If you hadn't been able to get to the rifle—" "But I did, and you came." She hesitated, then reached over to touch his hand. "I'm safe." He turned his hand palm up, fingers closing gently around hers. "Margaret couldn't shoot. couldn't bring herself to harm even a chicken for Sunday dinner. I loved that about her, that gentleness. And now I'm glad you're nothing like her. He squeezed her hand once and let go. That came out wrong. No, I understand. And she did. They sat quietly, the night sound surrounding them. My husband was gentle too, Sarah said eventually, sweet and dreaming, always planning what we'd do someday. I loved him for it, but out here... She gestured at the vast darkness. Out here, gentle doesn't always survive. You survived. Changed, though. Harder. Sometimes I wonder if James would recognize me now. Maybe that's what survival looks like, becoming what we need to be. A coyote howled in the distance, answered by another. Sarah shivered. You should go in, Thomas said. Catch a chill out here. She stood but paused at the door. Thomas, that day you found me, what made you check the barn so late? He was quiet so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Don't know. Just felt like I should. Like something was waiting out there in the snow. Lucky for me. Lucky for both of us, he said so quietly she almost missed it. Inside, Sarah lay awake thinking about those words, about the way safety felt different now, not the absence of danger, but the presence of someone willing to face it with her. The next morning brought sun and the sound of hammering. Sarah found Thomas and Jake reinforcing the shutters on the windows. Precaution, Thomas said when she raised an eyebrow. Nothing more. But she noticed he started wearing his sidearm, even for simple chores. And Jake took to riding the property line each morning. The easy peace of winter had cracked, letting in hints of the harder world beyond. A week later, Sarah was in the barn gathering eggs when she heard Jake talking to Thomas outside. Bentley's been in town, running his mouth, saying things about the lady. What kind of things? Thomas's voice was dangerous. The kind that'd get a man shot for repeating. Tom, maybe she should. She should what, run again, hide? Sarah stepped out, basket in hand. I'm tired of running. Mr. Jake. Jake touched his hat, embarrassed. Meant no offense, ma'am. Just worried is all. I know. Thank you. She looked at Thomas. What do you want to do? What do you want to do? He countered. It's your reputation they're slandering. Sarah thought of all the times she'd fled from whispers and turned backs, of cold nights and closed doors, of nearly dying alone in a barn because she had nowhere else to go. I want to stay, she said firmly. If you'll have me. Something shifted in Thomas's face. Then you'll stay. And if Bentley or anyone else has a problem with it, they can take it up with me. That evening, as Sarah prepared supper, she felt Thomas watching her from the doorway. No regrets, he asked. She turned to face him. None. This is home now. The word hung between them, weighted with meaning. Home. Not just shelter or employment, but something deeper, something worth defending. Sarah, Thomas started, then stopped. She waited, heart pounding, but he just shook his head. Supper smells good, he said instead. Later, clearing the dishes. Their hands touched again. This time, neither pulled away immediately. Sarah felt the calluses on his palm, the strength in his fingers. Felt, too, the gentleness he kept hidden from the world. Thank you, she whispered. For what? For giving me something worth fighting for again. His thumb brushed across her knuckles. Sarah. A door slammed, Jake coming in from the barn. They stepped apart, the moment broken, but not lost. It lingered in the air between them, a promise of words yet to be spoken. That night, Sarah heard Thomas walking the floor above, restless as a caged wolf. She understood. Something was building between them, inevitable as spring following winter. But with it came danger not just from men like Bentley, but from the risk of hoping again, of opening hearts scarred by loss. Still, as she drifted toward sleep, Sarah found herself smiling. Whatever came next, she wouldn't face it alone, and that, after so long in the cold, felt like the beginning of a thaw. The sound of horses, many horses, woke Sarah before dawn. She peered through her window to see torches dotting the yard like angry stars. Her blood ran cold as she recognized Bentley at the head of the group. But he wasn't alone. Half the men from Cedar Ridge seemed to be with him. Thomas was already dressed when she reached the kitchen, checking his rifle. Jake stood beside him, his young face grim. "Stay inside," Thomas said without looking at her. "No matter what happens." Thomas. "Please, Sarah." Now he did look at her, and something in his eyes made her throat tight. "Just this once. Do as I ask." She watched through the window as he stepped onto the porch, rifle held loose but ready. Jake flanked him on the left. "Morrison." Bentley's voice carried clearly in the still morning air. "We've come to talk sense." Funny way of talking, bringing 20 armed men to a man's door before sunrise. "The woman needs to go." This from another man. Sarah recognized him as Harlan Winters, who ran the general store. "She's poison. Morrison killed her husband, and now she's got her hooks in you." "That's a lie." Thomas's voice was steady as granite. "Is it?" Bentley leaned forward in his saddle. "James Whitman was a good man, healthy as a horse until he married her. 6 months later, dead from a fall. No witnesses but her. Accidents happen. Not to men who could ride before they could walk. Someone else from the crowd. She did something to him, poisoned him, maybe pushed him. And now she's here, working her wiles on you." Sarah's hands clenched, the old accusations, following her even here. "I'll say this once." Thomas said, "Sarah Whitman is under my protection. She works for me. Nothing more. Any man who says different is calling me a liar." "Then you're blind or bewitched." Bentley dismounted, others following. "We're here to save you from yourself. Morrison, the woman goes today, one way or another." "Over my dead body." "If that's how you want it." Sarah couldn't stand it anymore. She grabbed the shotgun from beside the door and stepped out beside Thomas. "No," she said clearly. "I won't have bloodshed for me." "Sarah, get back inside." Thomas didn't take his eyes off Bentley. "I've run before, hidden before. Let people like him drive me from place to place." She raised the shotgun. "Not anymore." "Listen to her. Someone called." "She talks like a man. No proper woman." "A proper woman?" Sarah's laugh was bitter. "You mean one who dies quietly when you cast her out, who freezes alone rather than accepting help. I was proper once. It nearly killed me." "You don't deny you were alone with your husband when he died." Harlan pressed. "I was with him, holding his hand as he breathed his last after his horse threw him. Have any of you never seen a horse spook at a snake?" Her voice grew stronger. "I loved my husband. I grieved for him. And for that, you branded me a killer." "Words," Bentley spat. "Pretty words from a pretty face. We know what you are." "Do you?" Sarah stepped forward. "Then know this too, I won't run again. This is my home now. I earn my keep with honest work. If that threatens you so much you need 20 armed men to face one woman, what does that say about you?" A murmur ran through the crowd. Some of the men looked uncomfortable now, seeing the torches in their hands, the guns pointed at a woman. "She's got a point," one man said quietly. "This don't feel right." "Shut up, young Collins," Bentley snarled. "She's bewitched Morrison, and she'll do the same to others if we let her stay. How many good men have to die before—" The crack of a rifle shot cut him off. Sheriff Cooper rode into the yard, his deputy beside him. The sheriff was a hard man in his 50s, fair but unbending when it came to the law. "That's enough." Cooper's voice carried the authority of his badge. "Lower those weapons, all of you." "Sheriff, we're just—" "I know what you're doing. Bentley, heard about your midnight ride in town. Mob justice isn't justice. The woman's dangerous. Harlan protested. Her husband died in an accident. I investigated it myself at the time, found no evidence of foul play. Cooper's eyes swept the crowd. Now, unless any of you have new evidence, real evidence, not gossip you'll disperse. She's living in sin with Morrison, someone called out. I work for Mr. Morrison, Sarah said firmly. I keep his house and his books. There's no sin in honest labor. That true, Morrison? Cooper asked. Every word, Mrs. Whitman is my employee. I'll swear to it on any Bible you choose. Cooper nodded. Then I see no crime here except armed trespass. You men have 1 minute to get off Morrison's land. Bentley's face was dark with rage. This isn't over. The law might not see what she is, but we do. 1 week, Morrison. Get rid of her or we'll be back. And no tin star will stop us. Threatening violence in front of a sheriff. Cooper's hand moved to his sidearm. That's jail talk. Bentley. Just stating facts. Bentley mounted his horse. 1 week. They left slowly, reluctantly, but they left. Sarah didn't lower the shotgun until the last torch disappeared over the rise. They'll be back, Thomas said quietly. I know. Cooper dismounted, looking tired. I can't be everywhere. Morrison, and men like Bentley. He shook his head. Mrs. Whitman, I'm sorry for what you've endured, but you might want to consider running. Sarah's voice was steady. No, I'm done being driven from place to place by small-minded people and their fears. Cooper studied her. You've changed since Cedar Ridge. I've had to. He nodded slowly. Well, I'll do what I can, but the law's only as strong as folks' willingness to follow it. After Cooper left, Sarah found herself shaking. Thomas guided her to a chair, pouring coffee with hands that weren't quite steady either. A week, she said. They gave us a week. To hell with their week. Thomas's voice was fierce. This is my land, my home. You're under my protection. Your protection? Sarah looked at him. Is that all I am to you, an obligation? The question hung between them. Thomas set down his cup carefully. You know that's not all. Do I? She stood, facing him. Because I need to know. Thomas, if I'm just a charity case, a good deed, tell me now. I'll leave before... He kissed her. It wasn't gentle, it was desperate, hungry, full of all the words they hadn't said. When they broke apart, both were breathing hard. That's what you are to me, he said roughly. God help me. I tried to keep my distance, tried to be honorable. But when I saw those men threatening you... His hands cupped her face. I can't lose someone else. Sarah, I can't. You won't. She covered his hands with hers. But Thomas, we only have a week. Then we'll face whatever comes together. His thumb stroked her cheeks. Unless you don't feel... I love you. The words came out in a rush. I didn't mean to. Didn't want to. It hurt too much. Losing James. I swore I'd never... But you made me want to live again, not just survive. He pulled her close, and she felt him tremble. Margaret's been gone 3 years, and I thought that part of me died with her. Then you crawled into my barn half frozen, and something I thought was dead started beating again. They held each other as the sun climbed higher, casting long shadows across the kitchen floor. What do we do? Sarah asked finally. Thomas pulled back to look at her. Marry me. What? Marry me. Today. Now. His eyes were intense. Let them come for my wife and see what happens. Thomas, that's... People will say I trapped you. That I'm exactly what they accused. I don't give a damn what people say. He gripped her shoulders. I'm asking you to marry me because I love you. Because I want to wake up every morning knowing you're there. Because when those bastards threatened you, I knew I'd kill or die to keep you safe. That's not obligation. Sarah, That's love. She searched his face, finding only truth. Yes. Yes. Yes, I'll marry you, though Lord knows we must be mad. He laughed, kissing her again. Mad's better than empty. Jake, who'd been conspicuously absent, chose that moment to clear his throat from the doorway. Hate to interrupt, but if you're doing what I think you're doing, better ride fast. Reverend Mills makes his circuit through the Henderson place today. Could catch him if you leave now. Thomas looked at Sarah. Ready to scandalize the whole territory. We're with you always. Within an hour, they were riding hard toward the Henderson ranch. Sarah in her best dress still pitifully worn. Thomas in his church clothes. The sky was brilliant blue, and despite everything, or because of it, Sarah found herself laughing. What's funny? Thomas called over the wind. Us. This getting married with a mob at our heels? Rather romantic, when you think about it. You have a strange idea of romance, Mr. Morrison. Wait until you see the wedding night I have planned. Jake's agreed to sleep in the barn. She blushed, but laughed again. After so much darkness, it felt good to race towards something bright, even if storm clouds gathered behind them. A week later, exactly as promised, they came. Sarah stood at the window watching the dust cloud approach larger than before. Maybe 30 men this time. The torches were lit despite the afternoon sun, a deliberate symbol of their intentions. They brought more friends, she said quietly. Thomas checked his rifle for the dozenth time. Jake's in the barn with Miguel and Carlos. They'll cover the sides. 3 ranch hands against 30 men. Sarah touched his arm. Thomas? 4, he corrected. You're not sitting this out. She nodded, moving to her position by the east window with the shotgun. Her hands were steady now. The wedding ring on her finger caught the light a simple band that had belonged to Thomas's mother, but it meant everything. The mob stopped just outside rifle range. Bentley rode forward alone, bold as brass. Morrison, time's up. Send out the woman. Thomas stepped onto the porch. The only woman here is my wife, and she's not going anywhere. A ripple of surprise ran through the crowd. Bentley's face darkened. Your wife. Married legal and proper by Reverend Mills a week ago. You want to see the certificate? A piece of paper doesn't change what she is, Bentley spat. She's fooled you. Morrison seduced you into... Into what happiness? Thomas's voice carried clearly. Yes, I'm guilty of that. Guilty of loving my wife and building a life with her. If that's a crime, then hang me for it. We just might. This from Harlan Winters. You've brought evil into our community. Morrison, first that Whitman fellow dies mysterious-like. Now you're bewitched. Who's next? Sarah had heard enough. She stepped out beside Thomas. Chin high. I'm right here. Mr. Winters, if you have accusations, make them to my face. Sarah Morrison, you mean? She said firmly. And I'll ask you again, what exactly am I accused of surviving when you cast me out to die, finding love after loss, working honest work for honest wages? You know what you did to your first husband, someone shouted. I held him while he died after his horse threw him. Have any of you never seen a man die from an accident, never lost someone sudden and senseless? Her voice grew stronger. I loved James Whitman. I mourned him. And yes, I moved on, because the living can't follow the dead into the grave, no matter how much grief demands it. Pretty words, Bentley started. The truth often is. Sheriff Cooper rode through the crowd, badge glinting. He wasn't alone. 5 deputies flanked him, all armed. Gentlemen, we need to talk about mob justice. Cooper, this ain't your business, Harlan protested. Armed men threatening citizens. That's exactly my business. Cooper dismounted, hand resting on his pistol. I've done some investigating this week. Talked to folks who knew the Whitmans in Cedar Ridge. Funny thing, the doctor who examined James Whitman's body, He confirmed the injuries matched a fall from a horse. No poison, no violence, just a tragic accident. Doctors can be bought, Bentley said. So can rumor mongers. Cooper stepped forward. I also learned something interesting about you. Bentley, seems you tried courting Mrs. Whitman yourself after her husband died. She refused you, repeatedly. The crowd murmured. Several men turned to look at Bentley with new understanding. That's a lie. I have 3 witnesses say otherwise, including Mrs. Patterson from the boarding house. Cooper's voice was steady. Makes a man wonder if your crusade against Mrs. Morrison here is about justice or wounded pride. Bentley's face flushed dark red. Even if that were true, it doesn't change what she is. Women like her, they use men, destroy them. Like I'm using Thomas. Sarah stepped forward. Then explain this. I've asked nothing of him but respect and partnership. I work beside him, not live off him. I brought order to his accounts, saving him money. I stand with him against threats instead of cowering behind him. If that's using a man, then guilty as charged. And I'm a willing victim, Thomas added, moving to stand beside her. Best thing that ever happened to me, being used this way. A few men in the crowd actually chuckled. The tide was turning. You fools! Bentley hissed. Can't you see she's got the sheriff bewitched too? Soon she'll have every man in the territory under her spell. Oh, for Christ's sake! The voice came from the back of the crowd. Dr. Harrison, the territory's most respected physician, pushed his way forward. I've held my tongue too long. Mrs. Morrison. I examined your late husband's body. I should have spoken up sooner, but I didn't want to get involved. That was cowardice on my part. He faced the crowd. James Whitman died from a broken neck sustained in a fall. His injuries were consistent with being thrown from a horse. There was no poison, no violence. Nothing suspicious except the eagerness of small minds to create scandal where none existed. Why didn't you say this before? Sarah asked quietly. Because I'm a coward, as I said. But seeing this, he gestured at the mob. This is what cowardice breeds. Madness and cruelty dressed up as righteousness. More murmurs from the crowd. Men began to shift uncomfortably, torches lowering. She still lived in sin with Morrison before they married. Harlan tried one last time. I worked for him, Sarah said clearly. Slept in my own room, kept proper distance until we married, but even if we hadn't, is that worth 30 armed men, worth threats and torches? How many of you have never felt loneliness or desire, never made choices others might judge? Judge, not lest ye be judged, a voice said. Reverend Mills rode up, Bible in hand. I married these 2, saw the love between them clear as day. If God has joined them together, who are we to tear them asunder? The crowd was fracturing now. Men looked at their torches as if seeing them for the first time. A few began to edge toward their horses. Bentley saw it too. Cowards! All of you fine, I'll handle this myself. He went for his gun. Thomas was faster, but Sarah was closest. She swung the shotgun like a club, catching Bentley across the jaw. He went down hard. No, she said, standing over him. No more violence. No more death. She looked at the crowd. I have lost one husband to senseless tragedy. I won't lose another to senseless hate. Cooper moved quickly, cuffing Bentley. Attempted murder? That's prison time. She attacked me, Bentley spluttered through a bloody mouth. To prevent you from drawing on her husband, I saw the whole thing. Cooper hauled him to his feet. Anyone else want to join him? The crowd melted away. Men mounted their horses, suddenly eager to be elsewhere. Harlan Winters was among the last to go. He paused, looking at Sarah. I may have been hasty in my judgment. Mrs. Morrison, your account at my store remains open, if you'll have it. Sarah nodded slightly. It wasn't an apology, but it was a start. Soon only their allies remained, Cooper and his deputies. Doc Harrison, Reverend Mills, and surprisingly, William Porter, one of the ranchers who'd ridden with the mob. Mrs. Morrison, Porter said, hat in hand. I owe you an apology. Got caught up in Bentley's poison. My wife, she'd like to call on you, if you're willing. Said any woman who'd stand like you did deserves respect, not torches. She's welcome any time, Sarah said, and meant it. After they all left, Sarah and Thomas stood alone on their porch. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. Jake and the others emerged from their positions, grinning with relief. Well, Mrs. Morrison, Thomas said, pulling her close. Still think you made the right choice, marrying a rancher with troublesome neighbors? Every day, she said, leaning into his warmth. Though I could do without the mobs. Hopefully, that's the last of them. Bentley was the poison. With him gone, others might remember how to think for themselves. She looked up at him. That was brave, what you did, standing against them all. You're the brave one. Taking down Bentley with a shotgun, he grinned. Remind me never to make you angry. I'll remind you of other things instead, she said, and kissed him as the stars began to appear. That night, for the first time since their marriage, they didn't have to worry about what morning might bring. Sarah lay in Thomas's arms, listening to his heartbeat, marveling at the peace of it. I love you, she whispered in the darkness. And I love you, he replied, pressing a kiss to her hair. My brave, fierce, wonderful wife. Your wife, she repeated, savoring the words. I like the sound of that. Get used to it. You're stuck with me now. Gladly. Outside, a soft snow began to fall, covering the traces of the mob's visit. By morning, the world would be clean and white again, ready for new beginnings. Sarah closed her eyes and let herself believe, finally, in the possibility of happiness. The barn where she'd almost died now stood as a monument to survival. The house that had sheltered her was truly home, and the man who'd saved her life had become her reason for living it fully. Sometimes the greatest loves were forged in the hardest times. Sarah Morrison knew that now, felt it with every beat of her mended heart. Whatever came next, she would face it as she'd faced down the mob with courage, truth, and the knowledge that she was no longer alone. The aftermath of the mob's dispersal brought not peace, but a different kind of war. Within days, the Morrisons found themselves isolated in ways more insidious than direct violence. No one would sell them supplies in town. The workers Thomas had hired for spring branding sent word they wouldn't be coming. Even the traveling merchant who'd traded with the ranch for years passed by without stopping. They're trying to starve us out, Thomas said grimly, reviewing their dwindling supplies. Bentley may be in jail, but his poison runs deep. Sarah studied the ledgers. We have enough flour and beans for 2 months if we're careful. The cattle need moving to spring pastures soon, though can't do that with just Jake. Miguel and Carlos are loyal. They'll stay. 3 men to move 200 head. Sarah shook her head. We need help. That help came from an unexpected source. Juan Morales arrived with his 2 sons and brother, all experienced vaqueros who'd been turned away from other ranches for being Mexican. Senora Morrison, Juan said, hat in hand. We hear you need workers. We need work. Perhaps we help each other. Sarah glanced at Thomas, who nodded. We can't pay full wages right now, she said honestly. Not until we sell some cattle. You stood against those men with torches, faced them down for what was right. Juan's weathered face creased in a smile. We work for people like that. Half wages now. Rest when cattle sell. Fair? More than fair, thank you. The work was brutal. Moving cattle across muddy spring terrain with too few hands meant 18-hour days in the saddle. Sarah rode alongside the men, learning to rope and herd, her hands blistering inside work gloves. At night, she cooked for the crew and tended injuries both human and animal. 2 weeks into the drive, they lost 5 head to wolves. The next night, Sarah woke to the sound of cattle bellowing in panic. Fire glowed orange against the darkness. Someone had set the supply wagon ablaze. "The cattle!" Thomas shouted. "They'll stampede!" Sarah grabbed blankets, soaking them in the water barrel. The smoke was choking, but she fought through it, beating at flames while the men tried to calm the terrified herd. By dawn, they'd saved most of the supplies and kept the cattle from scattering, but the message was clear: someone wanted them to fail. "Could have been lightning," Jake said without conviction. "Lightning doesn't leave boot prints," Thomas replied, pointing to tracks leading back toward town. That night, Sarah took first watch. She sat by the dying campfire, rifle across her knees, fighting exhaustion. A sound made her tense footsteps, trying to be quiet. "That's far enough," she called into the darkness. A figure emerged, Harlan Winter's son, Paul, barely 18 and looking scared. "Mrs. Morrison, I came to warn you. They're planning something worse. Pa doesn't know I'm here." Sarah lowered the rifle slightly. "What are they planning?" "Burning your barn. Maybe the house, too. Tomorrow night while you're still out here with the cattle." The boy twisted his hat. "It ain't right. Pa knows it ain't right, but he's scared to stand against the others." "Why are you telling us this?" Paul met her eyes. "Because you saved my little sister once, 2 winters back, when she had the fever. You sat with her all night while Ma was birthing my brother. You probably don't remember." "Emma," Sarah said softly. "I remember. She wanted stories about princesses." "Yes, ma'am. I can't let them hurt someone who saved Emma." He backing away. "I have to go before they miss me." "Paul," Sarah called. "Thank you." He disappeared into the darkness. Sarah woke Thomas and shared the warning. By dawn, they'd formed a new plan. They split up. Thomas and most of the hands continued with the cattle, while Sarah rode hard for home with Juan. They arrived to find Jake and Carlos already fortifying the barn, having received their message. As darkness fell, Sarah took position in the house with a clear view of both barn and road. Juan and his son spread out in strategic positions. They didn't have long to wait. 8 riders approached without torches this time, trying for stealth. Sarah recognized several shapesmen who'd smiled at her on the street before the rumors started, who'd tipped their hats and called her ma'am. Now they carried oil cans and malice. She fired into the ground before them. "That's close enough." The riders pulled up sharp. "Just go back inside. Mrs. Morrison," one called. "No one needs to get hurt." "Then why are you here with oil and rags?" She chambered another round loudly. "Turn around. Now." "Can't do that. You and your husband have brought shame to this community." "The only shame here is yours," Sarah replied. "Sneaking around at night like cowards. If you had real grievances, you'd voice them in daylight." One rider moved forward. Sarah's shot took his hat off, sending him reeling backward. "And next one won't miss. She promised." But they kept coming, spreading out to make harder targets. Sarah's heart pounded. She couldn't stop them all. Gunfire erupted from the barn. Juan and his sons had opened up, their shots disciplined and effective. Horses reared and whinnied. Men cursed and scattered. Then, impossibly, more gunfire from the road. Thomas and the remaining hands had ridden through the night, arriving just in time. Caught in crossfire, the would-be arsonists fled in disorder. "Anyone hit?" Thomas called when the dust settled. "No, patron," Juan replied. "They run like rabbits." Sarah emerged from the house, legs shaky with relief. Thomas pulled her into his arms. "I should have been here." "You were exactly where you needed to be," she interrupted. "We handled it together." Sheriff Cooper arrived at dawn, looking haggard. "Got reports of gunfire. Anyone want to tell me what happened?" Sarah gestured to the oil cans and rags the fleeing men had dropped. "Self-defense. Sheriff, they came to burn us out." Cooper examined the evidence, then sighed. "I know who rode out this way. Question is, will you press charges?" "What's the point?" Thomas asked bitterly. Their friends would just acquit them. Maybe, maybe not. Cooper looked thoughtful. Bentley's trial is next week. His lawyer's been spreading poison, saying you two orchestrated everything. But if we had proof of ongoing harassment... Sarah understood. You want us to testify, tell the whole story. It's dangerous. Cooper admitted. But it might be the only way to end this for good. Show the whole territory what's really been happening here. That night, Sarah found Thomas standing by Margaret's grave on the hill overlooking the ranch. She slipped her hand into his. I've been thinking about what Cooper said, he said quietly. About testifying. So have I. It could get worse before it gets better. They could... Thomas, she turned to face him. I'm tired of violence and darkness, tired of defending ourselves against shadows. If telling our truth in court might end this, isn't it worth trying? He touched her face gently. You've become so fierce. When did that happen? The night you pulled me from death's door, she said simply. Every day since has been a gift. I won't waste it hiding. Margaret would have liked you, Thomas said suddenly. She valued courage above all things. Sarah squeezed his hand. Then let's honor her memory and face this in the light. A week later, they sat in the packed courthouse. Word had spread the Witch of Cedar Ridge would testify. Sarah felt the weight of every stare but kept her chin high. When called to the stand, she told her story simply and clearly. James's death, the rumors, being cast out in winter, Thomas saving her life, the escalating harassment, the mob, the attempts to burn them out. In Mrs. Morrison, Bentley's lawyer said with false sympathy. Isn't it true you lived with Thomas Morrison for weeks before marrying him? I worked for him, Sarah replied calmly. As his housekeeper and bookkeeper, we maintained complete propriety until our marriage. So you say, but a young widow, desperate and alone, might say anything. Objection, the prosecutor stood. Counsel is testifying. Sustained. The lawyer changed tactics. You shot at those men who came to your ranch. I fired warning shots at men who came to burn our home in the night. Yes. Violence seems to follow you. Doesn't it? First your husband dies, then you're shooting at citizens. Citizens don't sneak onto property with oil and torches. Sarah interrupted. Criminals do. I defended my home. Any person here would do the same. Or perhaps you're simply a violent woman who... That's enough. The judge's gavel cracked. The jury will disregard counsel's speculation. But Sarah saw some jurors nodding, others looking troubled. The truth was fighting against deep-rooted prejudice. Then Doc Harrison testified about James's injuries. Juan Morales described the harassment, the burned wagon, the attempted arson. Even Paul Winters, brave despite his father's fury, confirmed he'd warned Sarah about the plot. By the trial's end, the tide had shifted. Bentley was convicted not just of attempted murder, but of conspiracy and inciting violence. Several others pled guilty to lesser charges. Outside the courthouse, Sarah felt the change. Some still turned away, but others nodded respectfully. Mrs. Porter approached with several other women. Mrs. Morrison, we're starting a quilting circle. We'd be honored if you join us. Sarah blinked back tears. I'd like that very much. The ride home was quiet, as they crested the hill overlooking their ranch. Thomas pulled up. Look at that, he said softly. Below, their barn stood intact. Their house sent smoke curling from the chimney. Cattle grazed in peaceful pastures. It looked like what it was, a home. We did it, Sarah breathed. We survived. More than survived. Thomas dismounted and helped her down, keeping her hand in his. We won. That night, as spring rain drummed on the roof, Sarah lay listening to the peaceful sound. No hoofbeats in the darkness, no torches, just rain and wind and Thomas breathing beside her. Thank you, she whispered. For what? for saving me that night, for standing by me, for giving me something worth fighting for." He pulled her close. "Sarah, you saved yourself. I just gave you a place to do it." She thought of the woman she'd been frightened, alone, ready to die in a stranger's barn. That woman was gone, transformed by love and trial into someone stronger. "We saved each other," she said finally. And in the darkness of their hard-won peace, that truth shone brighter than any torch. The late spring storm arrived without warning, transforming from light rain to a howling blizzard within hours. Sarah had seen storms before, but this one carried the malevolence of winter refusing to release its grip on the land. "It's too early for this," Thomas said, peering through the window at the white wall of snow. "The cattle are spread across the north pasture. If we don't get them to shelter—" He didn't need to finish. Cattle caught in a storm like this would drift with the wind until they hit a fence line or ravine, then pile up and freeze. They could lose half the herd, everything they'd fought to protect. "I'll ride with you," Sarah said, already reaching for her coat. "No," Thomas's voice was firm. "It's too dangerous." "We don't have enough hands. You need everyone who can ride." She met his eyes steadily. "I won't lose this ranch to weather after fighting so hard against men." Juan and his sons were already saddling horses when they reached the barn. The wind hit like a physical blow when they opened the doors, driving ice crystals that stung exposed skin. "We split up," Thomas shouted over the gale. "Juan, take the east section, Miguel and Carlos. Go west, Sarah and I will take the north ravine." Sarah pulled her hat low and followed Thomas into the white chaos. Within minutes, she could barely see his shape ahead of her. The world narrowed to the rhythm of her horse's movement and the burning cold in her lungs. They found the first group of cattle huddled against a rock outcropping. Thomas whistled and waved, trying to turn them toward home, but the animals were already half frozen with fear. Sarah rode to the far side, using her horse to push stragglers back to the group. "There's more further out," Thomas called. "Stay close." But the storm had other plans. A violent gust sent Sarah's horse stumbling. She kept her seat, but when she looked up, Thomas had vanished into the swirling white. She called his name, but the wind swallowed her voice. Panic clawed at her throat. She was alone in a blizzard, just as she'd been that night months ago. But she wasn't the same woman now. Sarah forced herself to think. The cattle would drift downwind, follow them, and she'd find the others or at least find shelter. She gave her horse its head, trusting its instincts over her own. Time lost meaning in the white darkness. Her hands went numb inside her gloves. Ice formed on her eyelashes, her scarf weighing her down. Then dark shapes ahead, cattle, dozens of them, pressed against what looked like— Sarah's heart sank. A fence line. They drifted too far east, pinned against the boundary wire. If they stayed here, they'd freeze. She tried to turn them, but alone. She couldn't move so many terrified animals. The cold was winning, seeping through her clothes, into her bones. She thought of Thomas, wondered if he was searching for her or fighting his own battle against the storm. A memory surfaced Juan, teaching her the old vaquero calls his grandfather had used. Worth trying. Sarah pursed her frozen lips and whistled the high, carrying note. Again, again. An answering whistle, barely audible through the wind. Then shapes riders. Juan and his eldest son, Pedro, materialized from the storm like ghosts. "Señora, thank God." Juan's face was ice-encrusted, but relieved. "We must move them now." Together, they worked the cattle away from the fence. Sarah's world narrowed to the task push. Turn, guide. Don't think about the cold. Don't think about Thomas. Just move the cattle. They'd gotten the herd halfway home when Sarah's horse stumbled again. This time, she couldn't keep her seat. The ground rushed up, knocking the breath from her lungs. She tried to rise, but her legs wouldn't cooperate. Señora Pedro was beside her, pulling her upright. "Can you ride?" I think so." But when she tried to mount, Her frozen hands couldn't grip the saddle horn. Juan made a quick decision. "Pedro, take her. I'll lead your horse." Pedro swung up behind her, arms around her to hold the reins. Sarah wanted to protest she could manage, but her body was shutting down, the cold winning despite her will. "Stay awake, Senora," Pedro urged. "Tell me about Ohio. What grows there?" She understood what he was doing, keeping her talking. "Conscious. Corn," she managed through chattering teeth. "Wheat, apples. My mother had an apple orchard." She talked about apple blossoms and summer harvests, about things she hadn't thought of in years. While Pedro guided them through the storm, the barn appeared like a miracle from the white, warm lantern light spilling from its doors. Thomas was there, face wild with relief and fear. He pulled her from the saddle, carrying her toward the house. "Get her inside, Miguel. Help Juan with the cattle." "The herd," Sarah tried to say. "Safe, most of them." His voice was rough. "God, Sarah, when I lost sight of you." "I'm all right." "You're half frozen." He kicked open the door, setting her in front of the fire. "Just like before, except this time you did it saving our livelihood instead of running from gossip." His hands were gentle but urgent, stripping away frozen outer clothes, wrapping her in warm blankets. Sarah wanted to help, but her fingers were useless, her whole body shaking. "Talk to me," Thomas commanded, rubbing her hands between his. "Keep talking." "Juan found me. Pedro. They saved. We got the cattle away from the fence." "You saved them." He moved to her feet, working off her boots. "That whistle Juan said you called them with an old vaquero signal. Where did you learn that?" "He taught me. Said it might be useful someday." Her shivering was violent now, her body fighting to warm itself. Thomas wrapped himself around her, sharing heat as he had that first night. But this time, Sarah was awake for it, aware of every point of contact, every shared breath. "I thought I'd lost you," he whispered against her hair. "When the storm separated us, I've never been so scared. I found my way. We both did." The shivering was easing, warmth creeping back into her limbs. "The ranch. We lost maybe a dozen head, could have been hundreds." His arms tightened. "You rode into a blizzard to save cattle. Margaret never. She was a town woman. Always afraid of horses, afraid of weather. I loved her, but she never understood why I needed this land. And I do. You fought for it, bled for it, nearly froze for it twice now." He pulled back to look at her. "This ranch isn't just mine anymore. It's ours, in every way that matters." A knock interrupted them. Juan entered, hat in hand, snow still clinging to his clothes. "Senora, how are you?" "Warming up, thanks to you and Pedro. We couldn't have saved them without you." Juan's weather-beaten face creased in a smile. "You called us Senora, the old way, like my grandfather. That's when I knew you're not just fighting for this land. You're part of it now." After he left, Sarah and Thomas sat in silence, listening to the storm gradually exhaust itself. By morning, the world was transformed deadly beauty, in white drifts and ice-crystalled trees. The next days were brutal work, digging out, checking cattle, repairing damage. But neighbors came to help some of the same men who'd once carried torches. Paul Winters brought his brothers. Even Harlan appeared with supplies from his store. "Credit's good again," he said gruffly, not meeting Sarah's eyes. "Storm like this, we help each other. That's the way of it." Sarah understood. Her actions in the storm had proven something words never could. She belonged here, had earned her place through sweat and courage. A week later, an unexpected visitor arrived, a well-dressed woman in her 50s, stepping carefully through the mud in city boots. "Mrs. Morrison, I'm Helen Whitman, James's mother." Sarah's breath caught. The woman who'd turned her back at the funeral, who'd believed the worst without question. May I come in?" Sarah stepped aside wordlessly. In the kitchen, she poured coffee with hands that barely trembled. "I received a letter from Sheriff Cooper," Helen began. "About the trial. About what really happened. I owe you an apology." "You owe me nothing," Sarah said quietly. "You lost your son. Grief makes us all act strangely." "No," Helen's voice was firm. "I failed you when you needed family most. Let my grief turn to anger. Let others poison my mind with lies." She reached into her bag, pulling out a small wooden box. These were James's, things from his childhood. "I thought perhaps you'd want them." Sarah opened the box with careful hands. A child's drawings, a pocket knife, a photograph of James as a boy, grinning gap-toothed at the camera. Tears blurred her vision. "He loved you," Helen said softly. "I see that now. His letters were full of joy after you married. I should have remembered that instead of listening to gossip." "We were happy," Sarah whispered. "So happy." "And now, are you happy again?" Sarah thought of Thomas, of their hard-won peace, of cattle saved from a blizzard, and neighbors learning to see her true. "Yes, different, but yes." Helen nodded. "Good. James would want that. He'd be proud of your strength." She stood to leave, then paused. "That grave in Cedar Ridge, it's well tended. Someone puts flowers there regular-like." "Thank you for telling me." Sarah walked her to the door. "Mrs. Whitman, would you like to correspond? Tell me more about James's childhood?" The older woman's face softened. "I'd like that very much." That night, Sarah showed Thomas the box. He handled each item carefully, understanding their significance. "Helps to have good memories preserved," he said. "Margaret's family took everything after she died. Said I'd just brood over it. Maybe they were right, but sometimes a man needs to brood." "I could write to them," Sarah offered. "Ask if they'd return some things." Thomas shook his head. "Let the past lie. I've got my memories and a future. That's enough." Sarah curled against his side. The box of James's treasures on the table beside Margaret's picture, the past honored but not ruling them. Outside, spring was finally winning against winter's last gasps. Soon there'd be calving, planting, the endless cycle of ranch life. But for now, in the circle of lamplight with storm-won peace surrounding them, yesterday's losses and tomorrow's labors could wait. They'd earned this moment of quiet, purchased with courage and frozen tears and the will to keep fighting when surrender would have been easier. The barn that had sheltered Sarah from death stood strong. The cattle they'd saved grazed peacefully. The community that had threatened them was learning, slowly, to accept them. And in the house that had become a home, two hearts scarred by loss beat steadily together, proof that sometimes the finest loves were forged in the hardest winters. Winter melted into spring, and spring bloomed into summer. The Morrison Ranch thrived under Sarah and Thomas's partnership. The cattle grew fat on sweet grass. The accounts showed profit for the first time in years. And the house rang with something that had been absent too long: laughter. Sarah stood on the porch one July evening, watching thunderheads build over the mountains. The air smelled of coming rain and possibilities. A rider approached, and she recognized Dr. Harrison's distinctive gray horse. "Mrs. Morrison." The doctor tipped his hat. "Thomas around?" "In the barn with Juan. Is someone hurt?" "No, nothing like that." He dismounted, looking oddly pleased. "I have news that concerns you both." Thomas emerged, wiping his hands on a rag. "Doc, everything all right?" "More than all right." Harrison grinned. "Bentley died in prison last week. Heart gave out, they say, but before he passed, he confessed something to the prison chaplain. He admitted to spreading those lies about Mrs. Morrison, said guilt was eating him alive." Sarah felt Thomas's hand find hers. "He confessed?" "In writing. The chaplain sent copies to every newspaper in the territory." Harrison pulled out a folded newsprint. Cedar Ridge Gazette ran it on the front page. Full exoneration. With trembling hands, Sarah read the headline, "Dying Man Clears Widow's Name, Years of Persecution Based on Lies." "It doesn't bring back the lost years," Harrison said gently, "but at least the truth is known now." That night, Sarah found herself standing by Elizabeth Morrison's grave. She'd taken to visiting it, talking to Thomas's first wife like an old friend. "He's happy," she said softly. "We both are. I hope you know that. I hope you're at peace with it." The wind stirred the grass. And for a moment, Sarah felt a presence warm, approving. Perhaps it was fancy, but she chose to believe Elizabeth understood. "Sarah," Thomas called from below. "You coming in?" In a moment, she touched the headstone gently, then made her way down to where her husband waited. The harvest season brought unexpected joy. The ranch's success had drawn positive attention, and 3 more families sought work. Sarah found herself managing a small community, arranging housing, organizing the children's lessons, mediating the occasional dispute. "You've built something here, Mrs." Porter observed during one of the quilting circle meetings. "More than just a ranch." Sarah looked out the window where children of various backgrounds played together Mexican, Anglo, even a Chinese family who'd fled discrimination in the mining camps. "We've all built it together." The first snow came early that year, but gently. Sarah no longer feared winter it had brought her to Thomas. After all, she was checking the accounts one evening when she felt odd, dizzy. She gripped the desk as the room spun. "Sarah." Thomas was beside her instantly. "What's wrong?" "I don't know. The world tilted, and she found herself in his arms. Dr. Harrison came within the hour, examining her with professional thoroughness. When he finished, his expression was unreadable. "Well?" Thomas demanded. "What's wrong with her?" "Nothing's wrong." The doctor's face split in a grin. "Congratulations. You're going to be parents." The silence that followed was profound. Sarah touched her stomach wonderingly. A baby. After all the loss and struggle, new life was growing within her. Thomas's whoop of joy could probably be heard in town. He swung her up, spinning her around until she laughed and begged him to stop. "A baby," he kept saying, "our baby." The news spread quickly. The women of the quilting circle descended with advice and baby clothes. Juan's wife Maria appointed herself Sarah's guardian, brewing special teas and monitoring her every move. "I'm pregnant, not dying." Sarah protested as Maria insisted she rest while the men handled the fall branding. "You carried life through a blizzard last year," Maria said firmly. "Now you carry life within you. This time, you rest." Christmas approached with pristine snow and anticipation. The house filled with preparations not just for the holiday, but for the baby due in spring. Thomas had started building a cradle, working in secret until Sarah caught him. "It's beautiful," she said, running her hands over the smooth wood. "Needs to be perfect." He wouldn't meet her eyes. "I keep thinking, what if I'm not good enough? What if—" "Thomas Morrison." She cupped his face. "You saved me from freezing. You stood against a mob for me. You've been the best husband I could dream of. You'll be a wonderful father." Christmas Eve brought unexpected visitors. A knock at the door revealed Harlan Winters with his entire family, including young Emma, who'd once been so sick. "We've come to carol," Harlan said gruffly. "If you'll have us." Soon the house filled with voices raised in song. Other families arrived, the Porters, the Morales clan, even Sheriff Cooper with his wife. The home that had once sheltered a dying woman now overflowed with life and community. Sarah found a quiet moment to step outside. The barn stood solid against the starry sky, no longer a symbol of near death but of survival. She thought of that desperate night a year ago, crawling through snow, ready to die. "Regrets?" Thomas asked, joining her. "Never. Not one." She leaned into his warmth. Though I do wonder sometimes if James can see this, if he's happy I found love again." "I think the dead want the living to live," Thomas said simply. "Margaret would tease me for taking so long to figure it out." They stood together, watching snow fall on the place they'd defended with blood and tears and stubborn courage. Inside, their friends sang of peace and joy. Under her heart, new life quickened. In Mrs. Morrison, Paul Winters appeared, looking nervous. "Could I speak with you?" "Of course." The young man squared his shoulders. "I've been accepted to study law in San Francisco. I wanted to thank you before I go." "Thank me?" "For showing me what courage looks like, for making me see that standing for what's right matters more than going along with the crowd." He pulled out an envelope. "I wrote it all down. What really happened. If you ever need it for the baby to know someday, it's all there. The truth." Sarah accepted the envelope with tears in her eyes. "Thank you, Paul. You'll make a fine lawyer." As the evening wound down and guests departed, Sarah and Thomas retired to their room. The cradle sat in the corner, waiting. The fire crackled warmly. Outside, snow continued to fall, but inside was warmth and love and hope. "Next Christmas, there'll be 3 of us," Thomas marveled. "Maybe 4, eventually," Sarah teased. "Don't get ahead of yourself, woman." They laughed, holding each other as the old year prepared to give way to the new. Sarah thought of all the pain that had brought them here, James's death, the cruel rumors, the flight through killing cold, the mobs and threats and trials. All of it had led to this moment, this life, this love. "I need to visit Cedar Ridge in spring," she said quietly. "Put flowers on James's grave. Tell him I'm all right, that I'll teach our child about him, about the dreams we had." "We'll go together," Thomas promised. "Face down any ghosts that linger." But Sarah knew the ghosts were already at peace. Love had exorcised them, replaced them with hope for the future. The woman who'd nearly died alone had found not just survival, but abundance love, community, purpose, and new life growing within. As sleep claimed her, Sarah's last thought was a prayer of gratitude for Thomas who'd saved her body, for the courage that had saved her spirit, for the child who would know only love, never the cold rejection she'd faced. The barn stood sentinel through the night, witness to the transformation of tragedy into triumph, and in the house it guarded. 2 hearts that had known loss beat in rhythm with a third just beginning its journey. It was more than Sarah had dared dream that desperate night in the snow. It was everything. Morning would come with chores and challenges, with a ranch to run and a baby to prepare for. The world beyond their fence might still hold those who wished them ill. But here, in this place carved from wilderness and defended with love, the Morrisons had built something unshakable. Home. And in the end, that was the greatest victory of all, not just surviving the cold, but learning to trust in warmth again. Not just enduring loss, but daring to love. Not just finding shelter, but creating a beacon of hope that drew others from their own cold nights into the circle of light. The woman who'd nearly frozen by the barn had become the warm heart of a community, and the story that began with death and despair had transformed into one of life and joy, as the snow continued to fall soft and peaceful on the Montana landscape. Sarah Morrison slept in her husband's arms, their child safe beneath her heart, their future bright with promise. The past was honored but not binding. The present was precious, and tomorrow was theirs to shape. The end. Thank you so much for listening to this Wild West love story. I hope Sarah and Thomas's journey touched your heart as much as it touched mine telling it. Where are you listening from today? I'd love to hear in the comments below. Whether you're in the mountains of Montana like our heroes, or somewhere completely different, please subscribe to From Wild West channel and share your thoughts about this story. Did you cry? Did you cheer when Sarah stood up to those men? Let me know. Your comments mean the world to me. Until our next adventure in the Old West, partners,